Hello, my name is Armand Beheshtian. We are Group 5, and we are presenting Should Recreational Cannabis Be Federally Legalized? Angel Alejandro, Ali Hussein, and Marvin Apuku is in our group. Let's go over the debate over federal legalization of recreational cannabis in the U.S. Our position on this issue is that the potential negative consequences of legalizing recreational cannabis outweigh any potential benefits, and therefore we are against its federal legalization. To give a little bit of context about this topic, the federal legalization of recreational cannabis is much debated in the U.S., and currently cannabis is illegal under federal law, but several states have legalized it for recreational use. So let's move on to social justice equity issues. Arguments against legalization suggest that legalizing recreational cannabis could exacerbate social inequalities such as race and socioeconomic status. Some studies have suggested that legalization could increase marijuana use among vulnerable populations, such as adolescents and those with mental health conditions. Furthermore, legalization could also lead to increased impaired driving, workplace accidents, and other adverse public health outcomes. There are concerns that legalization could lead to increased marketing and commercialization of cannabis, which also could affect negatively public health and safety. Critics do argue that the potential benefits of legalization, such as increased tax revenue and reduced incarceration rates, may not outweigh the negative consequences. Now we move on to the significance of this topic for public health. By taking a cautious approach to cannabis legalization and focusing on alternative approaches, we can prioritize public health and social justice while addressing the complex issues surrounding cannabis use in a responsible and effective manner. Research has shown that cannabis use can have negative effects on cognition, driving, and risk perception among adolescents. Legalization of recreational cannabis could lead to increased cannabis use and subsequently increased negative effects on cognitive function and risk perception. The commercialization and marketing of recreational cannabis could lead to increased consumption and addiction, which could have negative impacts on overall public health and safety. Furthermore, cannabis use has been linked to an increased risk of developing psychosis and other mental health issues. There is still much debate over the effectiveness of regulation and taxation in mitigating the negative public health outcomes of recreational marijuana use. While some proponents of legalization argue that it can help reduce the number of individuals incarcerated for cannabis-related offenses, there are concerns that legalization could lead to an increase in drug-related offenses overall.
What should the law be? The Controlled Substance Act is the framework that classifies and regulates drugs that are susceptible to misuse, abuse, or a risk to public health. Under the CSA, marijuana is classified as Schedule I, indicating that it is the most dangerous and addictive and strictly regulated by the federal government. Congress and the agencies under the executive branch, such as the DEA, have the ability to amend the CSA. These two arms should not make any future amendments of the Schedule I classification of marijuana, as it will cause mass use of a harmful drug that has negative implications to public health. Reducing the schedule will also create a perception amongst the masses that it is safe and less harmful drug, thereby leading to potential misuse. A law should be passed to ban the possible amendment of the CSA to potentially reduce its schedule from Schedule I to a lower one, to ban the CSA altogether, and to create a special category for the classification of marijuana because marijuana meets the criteria for inclusion into a Schedule I category due to its harmful effects. Political limitation. The president, who is the head of the cabinet, can authorize agencies to review and possibly amend the CSA. Additionally, under the Supremacy Clause, since the federal government is the Supreme Court of the land, the federal government should preempt state marijuana laws as the legalization and regulation of marijuana is illegal federally. Allowing states to legalize marijuana once again allows for mass use and poses significant public health issues. Due to anti-commandeering rule, which prohibits the federal government to force the states to enact a federal program, preemption may not be possible.
Regarding what we believe to be the better position, the federal government must protect its citizens. Public health policy must fundamentally advocate for the health interest of all it impacts. The legalization of cannabis has been shown to increase the diversion of cannabis to minors. Drug diversion involves the illegal transfer of a controlled substance, such as marijuana, to someone after it was legally acquired, either medically or recreationally in a state. In 2009, a study conducted in Colorado found almost half of its participants reported diverted legal marijuana use. Further, a strong correlation was observed between minors who reported legal cannabis diversion and its ease of access. Notably, this study also found an increase in motor vehicle accidents in which the driver was under the influence of cannabis. 10% of adult cannabis users develop an addiction or dependence, while this number is significantly higher in teens. Unlike prescription drugs, the lack of regulation surrounding the distribution of marijuana poses serious health concerns. Standards are inconsistent to non-existent, resulting in potential health risks, especially to immunocompromised individuals.
For the opposing side, there are many proponents of legalizing marijuana which have some limitations to our study. First is medical benefits. Proponents of legalizing marijuana cite many studies which show the many medical benefits of marijuana. For example, these include pain relief, reducing inflammation, improved sleep, and some even say it can help with cancer. For a second, it's economic benefits. Proponents of legalizing marijuana suggest that it can create an entire new industry which can create many jobs, which will in return generate tax return and revenue and can reduce the current law enforcement costs of preventing illegal use of marijuana. Third is criminal justice reform. Proponents of the legalization of marijuana bring up that the criminalization of marijuana disproportionately affects and targets communities of color. Some argue this could lead to addressing these racial disparities while also reducing the incarceration rates for these nonviolent drug offenses against mainly communities of color. Lastly is safety. Proponents argue that legalizing marijuana would lead to marijuana being distributed in a safe and regulated manner, preventing health hazards associated with black market drugs. Some argue that the legalization would lead to a decrease in opioid use and deaths, which is definitely an epidemic in certain parts of our country, as marijuana is a substitute for prescription painkillers for many people. Our stance against the legalization of recreational cannabis comes from substantial evidence that negative consequences outweigh any potential benefits. Cannabis legalization would have negative effects on public safety and health. The legalization of cannabis would lead to adverse effects on public health, such as increased use by minors, impaired driving, and addiction, among many other consequences. Overall, we argue that Congress and the DEA shouldn't alter marijuana's Schedule I classification in the future, since doing so would encourage widespread use of a dangerous drug with detrimental effects on the general public's health. We argue that since marijuana satisfies the requirement for inclusion into a Schedule I category due to its harmful effects, a law should be passed to prohibit the possible amendment of the CSA to potentially reduce its schedule from Schedule I to a lower one, to outright outlaw the CSA and create a special category for the classification of marijuana.